Welcome, bienvenue, bienvenidas, bienvenidos, willkommen. You have 24-hour nation. We're all here. There you are, Dr. Riss. Good. Through its website and social media, podcasts, webinars like this one, 24-hour nation provides news and information for nighttime advocates and adventurers of the night. My name is Randall White. Today's program it's her space as well, ensuring safe nighttime settings for women. Half the world's population is female. Half of the day is the night. So why isn't half of the day designed for half of the population? That's the question we're going to explore. You'll hear perspectives from 4 panelists: the journalist, the activist, the expert, and the futurist. We'll have time at the end of the hour to respond to some of your questions. You can use any of the question or chat boxes at the bottom of your screen. Before I introduce our guests, I would like to thank the Urban Planning Student Association at the University of Texas at San Antonio, particularly Luis Escalante, for their non-monetary support of this presentation. I thank you, and I thank your faculty advisors as well. You bring us hope. Now to our panelists, and why don't you wave your hands when I kind of call you out. The journalist, Domini Clark, is a writer and editor at the Globe and Mail, Canada's most widely read newspaper. This webinar was inspired in part by a piece she wrote for that newspaper. The activist, that's what I'm calling you, Tanisha. Tanisha Joseph is an urban planner who saw a need in her community that could be more responsive to women and girls, and then did something about it with nice acclaim. The expert, Dr. Sabina Riss, is an architect, resident, lecturer, a researcher, lecturer, instructor at TU Wien, the Vienna, Austria Institute of Technology, Vienna, Austria, not to confuse people with Vienna, Virginia. Dr. Riss is an international authority on gender equality in architecture and planning. And I'm very pleased to have you with us. And Domini might be able to tell everybody how we connected with you. And also then our futurist. Tiffany Vargas is a Master's of Science candidate in the Urban and Regional Planning program at the University of Texas at San Antonio. A focus of her research and thesis, as well as her passion, is today's topic. She knows what's next, or perhaps what should be next. So we'll begin with you, Domini. Just tell us a little bit of the backstory about what inspired this discussion today.
Sure. Well, so up here in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, where I live, when the clocks change in the fall, basically it becomes dark at 4:30 p.m. So there's a lot of darkness. And obviously, this is something I've been aware of my entire life. But during the pandemic, I moved here from Toronto. And for the first year, I didn't have to go back into Toronto for work. And then this fall, it was like, oh, you have to start going in 2 days a week, which is fine. I knew that was coming. But I just hadn't anticipated the walk from my home to the bus station. It's not like the best area. It's not the worst area. And as I walked it in the night, I was just like, oh, like this isn't the safest I've ever felt. Because when I lived in Toronto, it's a much bigger city. There's a lot of population. I used to walk around at midnight, 2 a.m. It was fine. And Hamilton's a smaller city. There's not as many people. There's not as many people out and about. And so it just suddenly struck me like, oh, that's a real difference in safety that I'm feeling. And I remembered last year when the clocks changed, seeing a lot of sort of memes on Instagram about women being like, oh, it's clock change time, or like, as women call it, like never go outside time. And so I felt that I compelled to write something about this, but I didn't want to just complain because, for women, we all know what we face and it's very easy to just whine and not present any solutions. And so I started doing research, and that's how I came across Sabina's work in Europe and this whole idea of gender responsive design and how we design our cities can make things so much better for women, and as an extension, also for many other people, not just one particular gender.
Okay, and the piece we've published it on we've got it shared on our website. I've shared it with most of the people who registered in advance. The topic of gender consideration sometimes receives pushback. Certainly in promoting this webinar, I had many people, even in some of the urbanist discussion groups on the social media platforms, push back at this, really sometimes angrily push back at this, about the idea of gender responsive design. How did people respond to your column in the Globe and Mail?
Yeah, I mean, so generally anytime you write about like a woman's issue, it's a bad idea to read the comments because it's, you know, it never goes over well. So there's one that I printed out here, and it's just a classic example of completely missing the point. And I don't know that it was written by a man, but I'm gonna guess that it was. So he starts off by saying, you know, he's trying to sympathize with me. But when you checked this move out, did you not realize that an unstaffed train station, an unused plaza, and a bus ride would be a huge part of your nighttime routine? Well, obviously, when I went to check out my move, I did check things out. But at the time, the bus station was staffed, and the main entrance that went onto a well-lit plaza was open. And since then, that entrance has been closed. You have to go through like a side exit now. It's no longer staffed. You know, so am I supposed to anticipate all of these things happening? Like, I did my due diligence, I did my research. I also assumed that when they were opening up a brand new train station, that the city's like most used east-west transit bus would go to it directly. I didn't think that was asking too much, but apparently it was. And then one of the other things, I talked about request bus stop programs. I don't know if people are familiar with this, but in many cities I've visited, after a certain hour, if you want to get off at night between the stops, you can ask the driver and he will let you off. And as far as I know, anyone can ask for this. The signs don't say women only. But the little comment was, what about the others who want to get home? It's not a taxi. Which, again, it's open to everyone. Everyone could use it like a taxi if they wanted. They have no one stopping them. And then finally, the last line was, keep your cell phone handy and perhaps talk to a friend while you're doing the final scary laps of your journey. And one of the first things they say in the piece is how women do all this, like, pardon my language, like, we do all this shit. We know what we're supposed to do to stay safe, but it shouldn't be our problem. Like, this is a much larger problem, which these experts will talk about and explain how it has much larger repercussions. And it's
right.
just,
Right. And sometimes I think also for a lot of the cities that have signed up for this webinar, as we're looking for public safety issues, everybody wants to come to the enforcement end of the spectrum and not necessarily the prevention end of the spectrum, which is a lot of gender responsive design can address. I'm going to jump now to you, Tanisha. You heard Domini talk about the experience of a journalist, a layperson in the night. What inspired you to do what you did? And tell us about what you did. And you can share your screen if you'd like too.
Well, for sure. Let me just start by sharing.
Well, while you're setting that up, let me just thank the Women in Urbanism Canada for connecting us. They're on the call, so tell us a little bit about. Are you afraid of the dark? TO, and it took me for a while to figure out that TO was Toronto, Ontario. Duh. Okay,
No
here we
worries.
are.
Everyone see the screen?
Yeah.
Perfect. So yeah, I'll just go into the background about like our story and how I came up with the idea for the project. So like many people during the pandemic, I became very like fascinated with like the public spaces like in my neighborhood. And I started to go on like walks in my neighborhood during the day and then also at night, like after school and work. And it was really through the night walks where I really noticed the lack of public spaces that were designed for after dark use, which meant that there were limited spaces for women and girls to just hang out after dark. And this Bloomberg article called "Teen Girls Need Better Spaces to Hang Out" was something that an article that I stumbled upon, and when I read through it, it really inspired me to move forward with the project. And I just really wanted to help empower women to take up space in cities and at night and imagine what can be possible. At its core, Are You Afraid of the Dark is really about encouraging women to reclaim space and show that they do belong in cities, in the public space. And in 2021, I applied to the 880 Cities Community Changemaker program. And through that program, I was able to get the training as well as the funding to put this idea into action. And there was an installation that was featured in the article that was titled Swing Time. It was featured in Boston, and it combined, the installation combined lighting and seating. And it was something that was widely received with not just only women and girls, but also everyone. So I thought, why not? I thought that this would be something that would benefit the women and girls in my community as well. And I wanted to kind of use the same idea of combining lighting and seating, but on a more budget-friendly approach. But yeah, so to talk more about the problem that we were trying to address with the project, in early 2022, we did an online public survey where we asked a series of questions to better understand how different elements of a public space can like encourage or discourage women and girls from using it. So the results were pretty striking, pretty alarming as well. The sample size was pretty small, it was about only 40 people. But through that, we learned that 83% of the women who were surveyed reported they experienced harassment or violence in a public space at least once. And out of then 90% of these women said it altered their behavior or routine in a very significant way. That being increased cautiousness, anxiety, as well as avoidance of certain places, especially at certain times of the night. More things that more results. So 94% of women reported they were likely to visit a public space during the day, versus 11% of women who reported they were likely to use it at night, which is very, very startling. And the top reasons being there was fear of violence and harassment. There wasn't a lot of people in the space, so there was low pedestrian traffic, and there was just overall poor lighting and visibility. So with that, the problem that we identified was that women face barriers to accessing public space at night due to the fear of violence, harassment, poor lighting, and low foot traffic. And the opportunity that we saw here was that by installing LED lit furniture in public spaces at night, we can create more vibrant and inviting public spaces for not just women and girls, but honestly for everyone, that improve lighting and provide a sense of community and belonging. So just go through a little short recap of the events. So our first ever event was called Girls Night Out. It was in Brampton, Ontario.
Yeah, that's terrific, Tanisha.
Thank you so much. So it was the first debut of our installation. And we collaborated with the Downtown Brampton BIA, and we transformed an underused laneway within Brampton into a vibrant outdoor gathering space. It was a free public event. It was open to anyone of all ages, all genders. We had refreshments, games, and as well as live music. And it was really a space to encourage women to hang out together and take up space within these and take up space together and empower each other to be in these spaces after dark. Our other event was featured at the Kitchener Pop-Up Park in Kitchener, Ontario, in which I had the pleasure of having the installation featured in, alongside many other activities that they had planned for that day as well. So this was a partnership with Kitchener, City of Kitchener and 880 Cities, in which they closed off a portion of King Street in front of their city hall and converted it into a pop-up park. It had green space, play structures, culture activities. They also had picnic tables, and open fire pit. And they were trying to explore different ways of how we can use our shared spaces for a variety of different uses and people. And in this event, I also helped facilitate some discussions about park safety after dark. So after the events, some things that we learned, or some results from it, was that we found that the installation helped draw attention to the space and encourage use. Even if people weren't like sitting or using the furniture, they were still moving through it because it was something that was eye-catching. They were trying to figure out like, oh, what is this? Like, what's going on here? And that added to the amount of foot traffic, the amount of people in the area, as well as the amount of eyes on the street. So most women know the very scary experience of having to navigate cities alone. So having more people in the space, more like eyes around, can help you feel more like welcome and more safe, because if you are in any chance of danger, there are still people around providing with assistance. And I think the most rewarding part of this project was definitely seeing the positive response from women and girls, whether like in person at these events, but also like online. People reaching out and telling me how like inspirational this has been for them, or how it has helped them imagine like the possibility of what our cities could be if we commit to prioritizing women and girls' experiences and perspectives. And
I think it just comes down to mindfulness. I think
Exactly.
It just comes down to mindfulness. I think Dr. Riss will probably inform us a little bit more that it's more than just that. That's terrific, Tanisha. I do want to say that your data about women who experience harassment in the nighttime spaces is absolutely in line with all the studies from around the world. That number is not unique to just your experience. Did you have more, or?
I said a final slide.
Sure.
It's just a quote from Leslie Kern, writer of Feminist City. It says, "No amount of lighting is going to abolish the patriarchy." I think this is a very important quote, because even though lighting and visibility was a very important indicator of why women and girls would use a particular space at night, it is not the only thing and won't be the only solution to the problem. There are also other avenues that we need to explore. There are also larger structural issues and like patterns of violence in our society that we need to address for women and girls to feel safe after dark. But yeah, that one.
That's terrific. Well, that's terrific. I love that. Afraid of the Dark TO. I'll post all of the links related to each of our panelists when I post the video as a YouTube. So this is a great segue to you, Dr. Riss. Sabina Riss from the Technical University of Technology in Vienna, Austria. So glad to have you with us. Thank you for joining us. You can go ahead and set up your share screen, because I'm just going to hand this over to you. I love the fact that we're talking about the built environment, and I want to define that for a lot of people, because unless you're in the urban planning world, you may not know what built environment means. It can be everything, and correct me if I'm wrong, Sabina, it's the buildings, how they relate to each other, lighting, sidewalks, it's everything in the public realm. In other words, you'll often hear designers use, but the built environment can be more inclusive and considerate of women. Okay, Dr. Riss, welcome. I'm so glad you were here. Good afternoon to you. Oh, you're on mute. Uh-oh. As we get your slides up, I can get you going.
Having problems to share the right screen. Just a second, please. For some reason. I'm not sure which screen you see.
I see the raw slide, not the screen, not the slideshow, but you can go through that if you'd like.
Oh, you saw the presentation, right? Because I had the impression.
Briefly. Yeah, it came up. The raw slides, they were there. Yeah. I think also one of the things Tiffany will be able to tell us about too is, perfect, is about Vienna a little bit. I hope you'll do that, Tiffany. Okay, there you go, Dr. Riss.
So I'd love to give a bit of a European perspective, because I know there are a lot of, US and Canadian experts today in this webinar. So I thought I bring in, kind of different, guidelines we're having in Europe, but also showing best practice examples. To add on everything we've heard so far. And right, so we have heard about challenges, and I think it's interesting. I also took a little text from Leslie Kern as an introduction, which is that many of the obstacles in the built urban space are invisible to men. So this relates to like the men's, responsibility for city planning for such a long time. And mostly this is because they rarely encounter them in their own experiences. And it means that the primary decision makers in cities, the majority of whom are still male, and unfortunately, it's still a majority of men who are in the decision-making positions. And this is mostly without having a clue or without having the awareness about the impacts that their planning is doing to women. So in that sense, I think this is something we really need to be aware of, and we really need to also to let our students know in planning education, and create this awareness that there's still an inequality among city planning decision makers, so which leads to a lot of issues we have specifically with how women feel in the built environment and how women feel at night. So there are a few slides on the perception of safety and safety risks for women, and then I would show a few guidelines of European countries, and then following with a few of examples how to ideally improve situations. So as we all know, and we have heard also before, there are definitely situations where women are more in danger, or they feel more insecure or unsafe in cities. So this is a subjective feeling which is related to how the built environment is built. It's about lighting, and it's about how cities are structured, how organized, how you can orientate yourself. And this definitely leads to women not being present in a way in cities, or like in a way men are present, specifically at night. And we've also already heard some numbers, but this is kind of from the European side. So women definitely feel less safe in public space, and they definitely report there are more incidents that happen to them. And as a matter of fact, then they have to adapt their lives or adjust their lives to those kind of circumstances that they are expecting in cities, specifically at night. And, as a male planner, you don't have this perspective. You don't know how it feels to feel unsafe in the city, or which places are bound to make women feel not safe. So this is quite important to always also then having people in decision-making positions in the planning field that are aware of kind of diverse needs of people, and this is in this respect specifically regarded to women. So and it's not only about women, but if you have different backgrounds, a migrant background, an LGBTQI plus background, Muslim background, then you're even more affected, because they're under other intersecting factors coming into play.
Right.
So there are a lot of things women criticize. We have a lot of studies in Europe going on these issues. So it's about lighting. It's about having to take detours. It's not being able to to spend the night or the hours of darkness in the city as much as men can do. And I would very quickly love to show you some kind of ideas the European Union has with kind of gender planning, which has been in fact for like 30 years almost, and which all the EC countries are bound to fulfill guidelines in planning. But this is not every country is equally doing that, but this is kind of ideal guidelines. So for the built environment and safety and security issues in cities are quite a big issue of gender planning, because it affects a lot of people, not only women and not only at night. So it's about how what kind of orientation you have in a city, how they're spatially organized, how visible things are, and there's always the social eye issue. Is important, how you view the city from the house, and is there any are you able to call someone? Is anyone being able to see you from some upper floors when you're on the street, to get some social kind of control? So it's about the good visibility, buildings being related to the street side, It's also about the ground floor zones, which should ideally be lively so that people are walking in their stores. And yeah, it's also about public transport, how you incorporate into the city pattern, how well accessible it is, how well lit it is. And definitely you always should avoid, dark underpasses, underground garages, and elements like this. And sorry, I'm now very quickly going to some best practice examples. This is also taken from European-wide studies in different countries and also different cities, and kind of showing their approach, how to, improve the safety and security in their cities. And this is, on the one hand, it's about, like how ideally can you improve overall situations in cities that you should, if you have not been dealing with that issue so far, you should start with like on one local, like a park, or you start in the city center, just to really work yourself through all the issues that are occurring there. And then if you get a feeling as a city planner or as a city administrator of what's in one area, and then you can also spread it to other areas of the city. So this is a lot of times it's about parks. It's also about city centers, which are, maybe, not so lively. And then you can kind of take on measurements you have developed. And it's, in the end, it's a lot about participation. So most of the cities who have been taking part in those studies and, trying to improve their safety in the cities, it's about participation on many levels. It's on the one hand about, raising the awareness by activities, for example, of doing campaigns. But also you should ideally include marginalized groups, because they know how they are affected by, especially women at night situations. And then it's a lot about kind of getting all stakeholders together. So it's about the citizen, it's about, police, for example, it's about planners, it's the city officials. So it's really a dialogue, you have to ideally hear everyone's voices and get ideas of how you can improve the situations. Also, it's good to, to work with the academia, to have universities on board to assist in those processes. So this really is about processes, how to involve the situation with as many people as possible. And there are a few samples of cities who have gone beyond that. So for example, they have done, or they have set up a kind of opinion map. So people would, with their mobiles, be able to, by walking through the city, to mark or to write about, unsafe parts, where they don't feel secure. And all this data is gathered in a digital way to then make the city, or enabling the city to create a manual for safer areas. So it's almost like a monitoring thing, but you really get a kind of personal touch to it. And you definitely can define areas where more people say, well, this is where I feel unsafe, and also giving the reasons why they do feel unsafe. And of course, it helps if you approach that on a broader level, not only like one city. And Europe, maybe cities are not that that large like in the US. So you sometimes have more cities, and it's maybe easier to just implement measurements if this is not only only a small city, but more several cities. And the women factor of it is also very important. And from on the international level, UN Habitat, for example, or UrbanNet, UN Women, they have come up with a lot of studies already and a lot of guidelines. And so this is really interesting to look into that. I also provide some links here. And I would then, to sum it up, again, give some reference, studies, literature, which is really important. It's, the World Bank has produced a handbook for gender inclusive urban planning design. And there is the Gender Equal Cities, which is a European organization, and they have produced a lot of studies and guidelines as well. And very new is Her City, which is also a UN Habitat study. And there's one book which it was published last year. It's there have been a lot. This is an evaluation of spatial development of European cities. So, and really kind of in a very structured way, kind of comparing them, you know, what they have done in matter of gender planning and female orientated planning, how they approached this issue and how they resolved it. So this is it from my side, very briefly.
All right. Well, thank you, Sabina. I'm certainly Vienna is the center of the universe, I think, when it comes to leading the discussion and the point of view on this, and particularly among students. I think I would like to then turn over to Tiffany Vargas. Tiffany is in the graduate program at the University of Texas at San Antonio in Urban. Tiffany, we know that Dr. Riss is putting in the minds of students the issue of gender imbalance in planning and urban design. What's the theme right now in coursework at the university level in the States? Is this front and center?
It's beginning to be. Actually, what has kicked off my entire thesis and made me aware of this, I guess we can call it urban and architectural problem, is I've started taking courses here in the graduate program that offer like history seminars on like discriminatory architecture. And it wasn't just about, you know, race, it was about gender, it was about maybe perhaps disability. And it's starting the conversation that I think a lot of us are really interested in, given the current political climate, given that there are so many changes rapidly approaching in the world and in our society. I feel that the winds are blowing towards wanting to hear more about these problems that are almost unseen, but we're really starting to notice.
What do you think is, what's the biggest trend you think is surfacing in terms of this entire awakening, this educational track? I hesitate to use the word woke in America because it has this bad connotation, but we are talking about an awareness of this discrimination in architecture, in the public realm. What's bubbling up and you think will be the biggest trend or opportunity, or needs to be the biggest trend or next?
I feel like this is the gender approach to design is going to be a big conversation because, and then also for different perspectives, like people who come from different backgrounds that are traditionally not in this, you know, people who are not typically part of the conversation. I'm seeing a shift in like how many people are in my classes. It used to be primarily males, and now I'm seeing that it's actually more majority females. So I feel like the voices are becoming more, you know, more diverse. And now people are more interested in how we can possibly change the built environment to better suit everyone's needs.
Do you feel like the old boys club is cracking open a little bit?
Yes, I do. In fact, even the firm that I work for, the architecture firm, is a women-owned business. It's definitely something that I'm very proud of and excited for.
Well, I'm going to, I appreciate that. And what I would like to do is open up to any questions of our guests that may be watching. I do know we have people register from Asia to deep into Eastern Europe. And we had a very large registration, as typical on a Monday morning here in the States anyway, for us. I'm very pleased with the response. If anybody has questions, I am intrigued. Domini, you at one point talk, or even if you have questions of each other. I know that Tiffany and Tanisha, Sabina is like I think an icon in the field of this topic. And I know you were both kind of excited to meet her. And Tiffany, you've talked a little bit about Vienna. How did that become the nexus of this particular of gender inclusion in design?
When I took that history seminar, I had to research a particular city that started working on correcting the problem, and Vienna was the first thing that came up, and Sabina's name was one of the first names that I read in an article, so it's a pleasure to meet you. And since Vienna has been doing this for 30 years, they're kind of the forerunners in this idea of gender mainstreaming, or, you know, women-centric design. And so my research, everything that has been informing my thesis, comes from Vienna. So I feel like all eyes will be on Vienna, or all research leads to Vienna in this regard.
Certainly. And do any of you, do either of you have questions you would like to ask specifically? Is there some academic question that, or even you, Domini? I know you're so intrigued by this as a writer and a journalist. You've been going, I need to write a book about this. Is there a question you would like to ask of our other panelists, Domini?
Oh gosh, now you're putting the journalist on the spot for
I
questions.
like to do that. It's about time, don't you think?
I mean, my question, I just want Tanisha to come to Hamilton. Like, how do I get you to come to my city and do one of these pop-ups? Because I
would love that. I would love that. I mean, I'm looking for more funding sources to do that, to try to expand the project. So,
well, and I know that in Dallas, the city of Dallas has an event called Women Unite, which is an event to dispel the concerns about women at night. The organization 24 Hour Dallas, which I founded, is planning that this year. And I kept thinking, oh my gosh, your pop-up would be a terrific element of that, because it would also appeal to girls as well as women, which is part of that. Let's start the demystification process young. Dr. Riss, Domini, did you have a question you want to ask?
Gonna say, so it's for Sabina, we've been talking, Vienna's been brought up and all of this, and is there data? I'm sure there is, but could you talk a little bit more, like those cities that have really done these projects, like how dramatic is the shift in terms of women's perception of safety? Like in Vienna, is it really above and beyond other cities in terms of how safe women feel?
Well, I'd like to say, well, thank you so much that you found my name and you mentioned me as an expert, but there are a lot of, quite a few women more senior than me, have been longer in the field than me, have been kind of, those are the women who have done the groundbreaking things in Vienna. Some of them are about to retire or have already retired. So we're talking about this age group, and they have started in the 1990s, so pretty early, even earlier than the European Union set up this mainstream gender planning rules or guidelines. So they have been kind of really very early with those things, but also they had the opportunity that they have been part of the city planning or the city administration. So I think to say this has been a successful way or a successful pattern that other cities could take on in terms of gender planning or female orientated planning, is that you need women who have a feminist thinking a background. They have to really ideally they want to fight for these things, so it's really it really does matter to them, and then ideally they are in kind of political or at least administrative positions where they are able to really to kind of do, for example, pilot projects, or they do evaluations, or they do an exhibition or some research. So this is kind of the key, and this had happened in Vienna, so it was not like an overall city planning top-down thing. It was like initiated by women, by very few women who have been, kind of influential. Yeah. So I'm very grateful for them that they have kind of, prepared the field. So it's kind of easy to now, to do more research and to, not to be a front woman, but, to kind of spread their knowledge and their, the projects and everything that has built up since then in the last 30 years. So this is what I wanted to mention, just to make sure, it's.
Okay, so that you're not at the top of the pyramid. Gotcha. You're somewhere on the pyramid. Well, and the whole idea of this relationship with the University of Texas at San Antonio and the Urban Planning Student Association there was also to kind of continue that legacy, to build the future legacy. So that's why I'm pleased that we have Tiffany and so many of the students that are in the Urban Planning Student Association listening and watching, because it is about creating the pathway for the future, I think, too, so that as the elders retire, we have new energy coming from the bottom and feeding the whole cycle. And hopefully not just women. Hopefully there will be men also going, this is important, because the whole idea of this webinar was to put in people's heads that this is possible. Domini? Did you have your hand? Did you wave your hand or?
It's like fingers crossed. but
Oh,
yeah.
okay. You were doing a hallelujah, maybe. Okay, I wasn't quite sure. I also really, there was a word you used, Sabina, that I had not heard before. I've often heard about eyes on the street. You know, I am not myself an urban planner. I'm kind of an activist. And but you also use the word the social eye. And in your illustration, you talked about, and this is probably basic stuff for the people who are planners and architects and designers, but that one illustration showed of people in the park and that various people from various levels and buildings being able to see them. I've also always thought about it being eyes on the street, that other people you see and that kind of thing, but I never thought about keeping in the eyes of observers, and that the amount of in design, how that also helps us feel safe. Can you speak a little bit more to the social eye? I love that reference.
I don't know where the expression comes from. Maybe it comes from Jane Jacobs. You know, you might want to, dig into that because,
Sure.
yeah. So it's from the 60s. So, and it's not something that Vienna has invented, but taken on by, I suppose it might have been Jane Jacobs. So the social eyes, it's like this social control. So it's not, you can do, you can improve safety by, anything with the built environment, but it's also about people, this kind of social control, this kind of, you see each other, you hear each other. So I think Tanisha, you mentioned that, right? Also, that it's so important, this kind of social aspect of it. And so, that one of the graphics I showed, it was about, a high rise. So if you're really high up in a high rise, of course, you don't have this relationship to the ground, to the street level or to the park or to the open space on the ground floor. So there have been studies made, and this is part of the gender planning guidelines in Europe, that I think there's a kind of a calling distance up to level 5 and like a watching distance up to level, I can't remember, is it 8 or 9? But then above that and beyond, there's no, if you live on, level 20, you hardly have any relationship to the ground floor, not vice versa, So in that sense.
Well, and Tanisha, I was very intrigued too. One of the people that is registered for this webinar and who's is a leader in the lighting industry and specifically outdoor lighting at night. And I'm intrigued by what your experience has been in incorporating lighting in your design. How did that make your particular pop-up, your projects be so appealing? What about the lighting? I'm very intrigued by that.
Yeah, I think the lighting was just a great way to not only like illuminate the space, but also just draw attention to it. And with the installation, like you can change like the color, you can change any color you want. The thing, to use the furniture, kind of have to use it in combination with other lighting sources. Like in the when we did the installation in the laneway, there was also like lights over top as well.
Sure.
To contribute to having more lighting in the space. And then as well, there was also street lighting in the pop-up in Kitchener. So yeah, the lighting was just a great way to create more attraction to the space and help funnel people into the space.
Okay. And Tiffany, I see there's a question here. I'm going to let you kind of facilitate that one. Why don't you bring that up?
Yes, it's for myself and Tanisha. It says, as students, in what ways have you influenced classmates towards thinking about and advocating for women's safety? I'll go ahead and start with that. I have been talking everyone's ear off about this for the past year, but what's really interesting is that I have some architecture professors or even urban planning professors who I have brought this up to, and the first word that always comes to me from a professor is equity. And so if you think about it as an equitable question, or I guess you could say problem, it's not even so much about gender as it is about just making things a more even playing field for everyone involved. It's not just women, it's maybe perhaps people who are bound to a wheelchair and need a more wide open space, or want to exist in a plaza area where they can be amongst their peers and not often have that opportunity. So I feel like when you frame it as just like, oh, it's a women problem, Domini, I think you said like, it's just us complaining sometimes, that's not what this is. It's about starting a conversation and pointing out that this is an issue that can help so many people, not just women. And so I feel like that's a great way to advocate for gender mainstreaming, because my whole thesis is revolving around the idea that a female-centric city is an accessible city. So that's what I've been doing, and I hope that I've been doing it justice.
Okay, when you just a sidebar before I let Tanisha respond to this question from Luis Escalante. Thank you again, Luis. When is your thesis? What's the timeline there for you to?
It's just kicked off on Wednesday, and I'm very excited. I have a stack of books this high, which Sabina, you have like part of that stack on your presentation. I will be completing it in May, and I hope to have something that can kind of call better attention and offer a great solution to what our urban future might be. So hopefully I can do it some justice.
That would be great. Then perhaps you can relocate to Vienna and study a little bit more. That would be nice. Tanisha, how would you respond to that? How have you been helping your colleagues influence them into thinking more about advocating for women's safety in the night space?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm no longer a student anymore. I actually graduated last year, but in terms of advocating for women's safety, my project page does have a Instagram where we talk about like different issues in response to women's safety at night, different approaches to creating more inclusive cities. I think it really just boils down to like equity and inclusion, and just understanding that gender responsive design is something that can benefit everyone, and it's not just a woman's like thing. It's something that benefits everyone of all ages, all genders. We all can stand to benefit from initiatives and projects that make our cities more livable and more walkable. So for me, it's really just about promoting equity and inclusion as really central parts of my values and the values for the project, and making people realize that in order to create cities for everyone, we have to incorporate those perspectives of everyone. So this is really just about including more perspectives into the conversation.
Sure, that's terrific, and you are at it. I follow your feeds, and I will share all of that on when I post this on live, as well as Sabina. Some of those documents you shared, I will grab them if they're PDFs. I will also post them in our resources, because I'm trying on the 24-Hour Nation website. I'm trying to establish kind of a library where anybody interested in that topic can go to, not from an academic perspective, but largely from the nighttime economy advocates. We have nighttime economy managers, night mayors who are on this program listening, follow up. We'll read it later. Consultants working in the space. I just want to put this idea in people's heads so that it is front of mind when they begin planning events, spaces, parks, anything that involves half the population, half of the day. Here's a question. It's a great question, and it perhaps requires both maybe Domini and Sabina response here. Someone says, this is a great session. Thank you. 24-Hour Nation thanks you. As someone who was born in Hamilton, it's so nice to see the Canadian participation. My question is this: all over Europe now, and this is really pervasive, cities and towns are turning off the lights at night to save money, to combat light pollution, because we haven't talked much about that. While lighting doesn't abolish patriarchy, do we need to expand urban lighting to guarantee gender-based security? I'll start with the layperson's point of view. Domini, you had a wonderful story about a village in Wales?
Oh, I mean, I have a weird obsession with that country. But yeah, you were asking like where I feel safe when I'm traveling, and in smaller communities, I definitely feel safer in these little villages. And it's funny because they're not necessarily really well lit, but I think it kind of gets to Sabina's point about that, the social eye, which I also loved that concept of. You sense that there's more people around, that even if they're in their houses are closer. One of the things I talked about in my piece, or I meant to, walking on the stretch where I walk from the station to my house, one side of it has street lights and the other doesn't. So if you are waiting for the bus on the lit side, you feel much safer than if you're on the unlit side. And so it's a really good question of how do we balance, environmental needs, which I'm also very passionate about, with this idea of safety. It's a really good one. I don't have an answer. But
well, maybe Dr. Riss does. They are.
So.
Yeah, I see the studies across France. The villages and towns are turning off the light because we've seen the maps from space. And if you look at the United States from outer space, oh my gosh, it looks like, a nightlight. It's every town, every city is like this glowing ember. So, but in Europe, particularly, Dr. Riss, they are turning out the lights. How does that affect, do you think, security for women?
Well, let me kind of come back to the Vienna situation again, because the aspect of safety and lighting in order to provide, a safe environment, specifically for women, has been a major issue like in the past decade. So Vienna is a very well lit city, and, there have been a lot of improvements or renovations or upgradings made in areas where lighting had not been, efficient enough. So this is a very good, a point now, a very interesting question. How do we deal with, we have to save energy, and is this going to be on the cost of, reducing the lighting? So to be very honest with you, I have not heard about, specifically in Vienna, not that, some districts would turn out the lights, I have not heard that. So maybe in other countries or other cities. So that's why I have not been dealing with the issue. But of course, it's understandable that you have to, you want to save, cost, you want to save energy. But then the question is it affecting, a lot of other people in other ways then?
Sure. And I wonder if they're in these conversations where municipalities and smaller villages, et cetera, are turning out the light, if they are being inclusive in the discussion and the plans to do this, or is it just somebody in the office going, we got to save money, we got to do something about light pollution, I'm just turning out the light, without having the conversation perhaps with those who might be affected in terms of a sense of security. That's really kind of your message, isn't it, Dr. Riss, that be more inclusive in this discussion and decision-making process, right?
Definitely, all the factors have to be considered, like always. Every, in planning, always ideally have to consider all the factors and who is affected by what kind of concepts, by what kind of measurements, by what kind of build realizations. So
yeah, and that's hard. People don't like to do hard. There's a wonderful question here from Portland State University in Oregon. Had a PDX talk, like a TEDx talk. It's on YouTube. It says one of the presenters did an excellent talk about the city at night. They provide me with a YouTube link. I will also grab that and post that on the 24 Hour Nation's YouTube channel. We are close to, well, I'm going to see one more question here. Let's see if we can get it in. Thank you for the session. This will be the last question I'll be able to, I see Monica Mueller responds that the lighting in cities was more about Christmas lighting. It was turned off earlier to save energy. Thank you for that insight. Vanessa Conroy asks my question, do cities have to become safer spaces for children in order to become safer and more usable for women? What do you think? Tanisha, I saw you kind of light up at that first. I think
so.
Okay.
Because I feel like if a space is comfortable for a child to be in, it'll for sure be comfortable for a woman to be in. So I think it's just really about making city safer for children, and that in turn will make it safer for everyone else. And children as well are also a group that is not really engaged within planning. So I think having them be a part of the conversation as well, as well as women, would help create a more well-rounded conversation within.
I agree, and there's a lot of data actually out of South America. South America about events and things that are planned at night for families that include children actually make the spaces safer. So I'm very intrigued by that. The culture, it might be a cultural opportunity to model after in some other cities. More family events at night. This is why I hound all the time. Why aren't museums open at night? Why do they close at 5? Why do museums close at 5? With that, I would like to thank our journalist, Domini Clark, our activist, Nisha Joseph, our expert, Dr. Sabina Riss, our futurist, Tiffany Vargas. Within a day of recording this webinar, it will be posted at 24hournation.com and on our YouTube channel. And along with that, I will post links to the Globe and Mail, Are You Afraid of the Dark, TO, et cetera, and with my appreciation in the Urban Planning Students Association at the University of Texas, San Antonio. Next month, we're going to host some leaders. This is a new announcement from Sydney and New South Wales to talk about how that region has bounced back after their notorious lockout laws nearly proved fatal to their nightlife. Follow 24 Hour Nation on social media. We're everywhere. Except TikTok. And links are on the website at 24hournation.com. My name is Randall White. Thank you, ladies, for joining us, and thank you all for dialing in. Take care.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Bye.